thank you for taking the time to be with us at C3. We hope you enjoy today's message.
Hey, so this morning we are in Exodus still. We're getting there. Anybody tired of Exodus yet? Don't raise your hand. Raise your hand in your heart. We could do that. We could every head bowed, every eyes closed. Who's tired of this series? I see that hand. Guys, it's just getting to good stuff. It's just getting to the laws and all the weird, boiling goats in their mother's milk and stuff like that. Come on, aren't you excited about that? I mean, wow. Yeah, so that's where we are. Exodus chapter 22 this morning. We're gonna cruise right into chapter 23. We're getting there. Pastor Greg's already talking about what's next, which is a good sign. So, but we've been in Exodus since I think July, right? Did we open it at the picnic? Yeah. If you go, okay. So the c3area.info page. I'm gonna get in trouble for this, but it's on the interweb, so you can't. It's out. But if you go to the .info page, you can go to the sermons, and you guys may have seen this, but all the sermons are there from Exodus, and they're videos. You can watch the videos, you can listen to the audio. It's very cool. But if you go back to the very beginning, you can see the one from the church picnic, which is Pastor Greg was like the cruise ship captain outfit that day. So do yourself a favor, go back, check out that outfit. It was awesome. And it makes us all think of warmer weather, right? Don't you wish it was church picnic day? Yeah. But it's almost baseball season, so I'm excited about that. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm digressing already. It's a good day. It's good to be with you all. So, Exodus 22. I'm trying to hype these laws because if you've ever done a biblical study on this stuff, it can get real boring really fast. And I hope it won't do that. I'll tell you what we're not going to do real fast. What we're not going to do is go law by law and talk about all the history of every single one of these because, first of all, I didn't have that much time to research it all this last week, but that would be boring. Pastors like to do that, but it's not that helpful in the long run, let's be honest. So I could talk to you all about what some of these things historically meant and culturally meant, and some of that would be relevant. We'll do a little bit of that. But what we're going to try to do today is try to take a look at these things and just pull it forward and say, how can this law given to the people of Israel more than 2,000 years ago, pushing 2,500 years ago or more, how can that impact and affect our lives today? How does that make a difference in what we're doing right now? And because you've got a people here who was in slavery in Egypt for about 500 years, and in that time, they're crying out to God, saying, God, we know that you were faithful to our forefathers, Abraham and Isaac, and we're here in Israel, and we're crying out, and just bring us out of slavery. They were enslaved by the Egyptians, and God finally hears the cry, and at the beginning of Exodus, we see the story of him raising up Moses and saving him from the genocide that was being committed, and kind of raising him up inside Pharaoh's own house. And he comes up as a prince of Egypt, and God begins to reveal himself to Moses and kind of works this out and says, Moses, you're going to be the one to lead my people out of slavery. And so there's this tremendous story and all this stuff, and God, after 500 years, comes and he answers the prayers of his people of Israel, and they get out of Israel, or of Egypt, and they're making their way now to the Promised Land. This is a people that's kind of been nomadic for most of their history. They've never really had a home or a land, and so that's kind of where they're going, and God is going to give them a place. And so, but before they get to the Promised Land, before they get to God establishes them as a nation, what he's doing is he's setting up all the kind of foundations and the building blocks of this people. He's establishing his covenant with them, and this is how we're going to relate to each other, and this is what I'm going to be faithful to, and what I'm going to do as your God, and this is what you are responsible for as my people. And so kind of the rest of Exodus, the first half is all exciting. It makes for good movies and stuff like that, but nobody ever really goes past Mount Sinai and the Ten Commandments, right? It just this is the part where it slows down a little bit, but it's so important because God is establishing his law with the people of Israel. This is what's going to govern them. And we've talked a lot about boundaries and guide rails and how they keep us safe. And that's kind of the context for that. And so what's interesting about some of this is it's kind of, for Israel, it's kind of like case law. So the first sections we've been going through for the last couple weeks, God is sort of laying out, these are some examples of how you're supposed to deal with certain situations. Because there's always, even in the people of God, there's going to be some rub. You're going to get in some trouble with each other. Somebody's going to rub you the wrong way. You're going to have a dispute. Something's going to happen. And you need to have ways to deal with that. And so the last couple of weeks, looking about some of these laws we've been doing about slaves in chapter 21 and first part of 22, it's kind of like laws you can go back on and say, okay, this is how kind of God through Moses said we were supposed to deal with this. So now we've got this situation. Let's see kind of what applies and how it goes. But this section we're in today, this isn't so much case law, but these are more like generally applicable legal instructions. So that's your first fill in the blank if you're into that. And so it just means that these are a little bit more specific scenarios. These aren't like examples, but they're like more specific. And these laws were given specifically to the people of Israel. And so we have to keep that in mind too, okay? Sometimes, in the church, especially in America, we kind of read Israel and we think us. And that's not always the case. And so what we have to be careful about is that we don't kind of conflate the two too much. This is God speaking to Israel a long, long time ago, and we are now here as non-Jewish Gentile believers grafted into the family of God. And so there's a big difference between what this was to them and what it is to us. And so hopefully what we're going to do today is we're going to take some of the heart of this and pull it forward, see what Jesus has to say, and see what it can speak to our lives. You guys good with that? Amen. All right. So God's forming a people, like we said. He's forming Israel. He's getting to know them, and what's important for us today is, like I said, the heart of these laws. And so if you look at the New Testament, Jesus is always battling with what group of people? The religious kind of elite, right? He's kind of dealing with the Pharisees and the people who are supposed to be the ones who are spiritually leading Israel. And unfortunately, what's happened is when Jesus is there, these Pharisees have kind of taken this law, the stuff that we're kind of talking about now, and there's a lot more to it than what you're going to read today, but they've taken these laws and this kind of stuff, and what they've done is they have taken what was written, and they've taken it so literally, so like down to the dot of what's written, and said this is exactly how we have to do it, and we have to maintain the letter of this law specifically. And what you see Jesus doing all the time with the Pharisees is He's basically saying, you have imposed the letter of the law, but what he says is important is basically the heart of the law. And so there's an intention behind a law. And the problem with laws, especially in our society, in an enlightened sense, is we like everything to be really logical, right? So when we have a big debate about a law, they look at little different words that, and then we start to debate the meaning of the words that make up a law, right? You can turn right on red. Okay, well, which direction's right? What does right mean? Does that mean correct, or does that mean the direction right? And you can debate that in court, and you might win a case by just saying, what does that word actually mean, right? We get so hung up on the letter of the law, and what Jesus constantly does is pulls out the heart of the law, right? The heart of the turn right on red law, and this is just a terrible example, I pull out of thin air, but the heart of it is to say, hey, if there's nobody in an intersection and you're turning right, it's relatively low risk, right? If it's a red light and you come to a stop and nobody's there, you can go. That's the point of it, right? And sometimes that can get abused and sometimes things can happen. But where we can get in trouble is falling into, like the Pharisees did, enforcing the letter of the law. And Jesus came and fulfilled the heart of the law. So what's important today is to look at the heart of these laws. What is it that they are trying to prevent or protect? Because that's what laws do. They prevent something, or they protect something, or they give you a chance to enforce something. So if somebody murders somebody, but you don't have a law that says you can't murder somebody, how do you hold them accountable for that, right? You have to have a law to hold somebody accountable when they do something wrong. And so we've got to look at what are these trying to prevent or protect. Now, this particular set of laws, and maybe even all of the law in the Old Testament, can be summed up in two different categories. The first category is about having to do with honoring God. So one half, not an accurate half, but roughly half of all the laws in the Old Testament are structured to help us honor God, to either prevent us from not honoring God, or to remind us, protect us from doing things that don't honor God, or teaching us how to honor God. So that's the first category. The other category of laws always falls into, how do you treat other people? How do you show love to other people? So you've got two categories: honor God and show love to other people. And if you look at the heart of just about every law in the Old Testament, you can see where they kind of fall into one of these two categories. And so when it comes to pulling out what we're supposed to do and pulling it forward, it's important to kind of see, which way does that fall? Is this about honoring God? Is this about showing love to other people? So we're going to look at a few of these laws today, but mostly we're going to pull it forward, see how Jesus wraps them all together. So let's read a little bit here. We're in Exodus chapter 22, verse 18. I've got the English Standard Version, so if you got something else, enjoy the difference. All right? So verse 18, it says, "You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death." Verse 20, "Whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. You shall not wrong a sojourner or a foreigner or oppress him, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry, and my wrath will burn, and I will kill you with the sword, and your wives shall become widows and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not exact interest from him." Ooh, let's go. Anybody got student loans? "If you ever take your neighbor's cloak in pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, and it is his cloak for his body. In what else shall he sleep? And if he cries to me, I will hear, for I am compassionate." So this is a little bit of a rhythm here. You kind of hear this like, if you do something bad to somebody poor, God will hear if they cry out to him, right? Okay, pay attention to things like that. Verse 28, "You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and from the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. You shall do the same with your oxen and with your sheep. 7 days it shall be with his mother, and on the 8th day you shall give it to me. You shall be consecrated to me, therefore you shall not eat any flesh that is torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs." Anybody ever grab some roadkill on your way home? Okay. Exodus, don't do it. It's gross. Chapter 23, "You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. You shall not fall in with the many to do evil, nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Nor shall you be partial to a poor man in his lawsuit." Verse 4, "If you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying down under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him." So if you see your enemy's ox, it's laying down on the ground, it's got a big heavy pack. Maybe it wandered off. Maybe he didn't know what happened. Maybe he said, "Hey, ox, take this pack and go down the road," and just sent it. I don't know. But if it's laying there, it's an enemy, it's a guy you don't like, don't walk away. Help the thing out, right? Some compassion. Verse 6, "You shall not pervert the justice due to your poor in his lawsuit. Keep far from a false charge and do not kill the innocent and righteous, for I will not acquit the wicked. And you shall take no bribe, for a bribe blinds the clear-sighted and subverts the cause of those who are in the right. You shall not oppress a sojourner. You know the heart of a sojourner or a foreigner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." Now, I mean, at first glance, if we could pull all of those word for word forward, it might clean up a few things, right? Might be kind of nice. Don't take bribes. Don't be a bad witness in court, like things like that. But all in all, these are some pretty like diverse instructions, okay? They don't seem to really mix together. You've got sorcery, sacrifices, foreigners, money lending and interest, collateral, first fruits and animals, lying, witnesses, bribery, your enemy's Prius or donkey. There's lots of different things all kind of slapped together. And so just a brief kind of historical contextual note, it's likely these kind of laws show up in a lot of different places in the ancient world. Hammurabi's Code, and even before that, some places like that. So if you're a little bit of a history legal buff, there's a thought that some of this is familiar even to Israel, that it might have been pulled in from other cultures, okay? So, but it's kind of this conglomeration of different things. And what I actually did in my Bible, just getting ready to preach this, is I went through and I kind of like highlighted what is talking about honoring God and what's talking about showing love or treating love to a neighbor. And so there's a little section at the top, then a big section in the middle, a little section in the middle, and then the rest of it. And it's kind of splits pretty well 50-50. Some of this is about honoring God. Some of this is about showing love to other people. And we'll get to that. So there's a vast number of things here, but our first important takeaway really is a lot of this is kind of all-encompassing. Like it has to do with the way we worship. It has to do with the way we treat other people. It has to do with how we behave in court, how we interact with our enemies when we see their stuff on the road or whatever. And so the first important takeaway is that all parts of your life are an expression of your obedience to God. All parts of life are an expression of one's obedience to God. Okay, God does not compartmentalize our lives. He doesn't kind of say, okay, great, your like Christian piece is over here, and your work piece is over here, and your party nightlife is over here, and the way you treat this guy who was really awful to you, that's over here, and these people who are different than you that you don't like very much, they think you're ruining and they're taking your stuff, they're over here, and you get to treat them all differently. That's not how God works. God doesn't compartmentalize our lives. He wants the whole thing. He looks at the whole heart. Right? We don't get to just take out little pieces and say, God, I'm going to honor you in this life, but over here, you know what? Don't have a say. You don't have a say in that. God's laws are like literally from A to Z. I mean, the stuff that he's laying out for Israel encompasses so much. And so it's important to recognize that all parts of your life are an expression of your obedience to God. Are you obeying God on Sunday morning the same way that you obey God on Tuesday afternoon? See, if you're like a morning devotional person, your devotions in the morning should affect how you respond in the afternoon, right? If you wake up and you maybe you're in the shower and you're praying and you say, God, help me have a great day today, and I've been stressed. I got this thing at work coming up. Help me with that. That'd be really great. Help me to calm down. Give me some favor with my boss, whatever. And then you go in and you're having your coffee, 11:30, or a little break or whatever's going on, and something happens and it rubs your skin. You snap at somebody. It's like, okay, well maybe that was an opportunity to be Christ, and things aren't lining up. Now, I get it. We're not perfect. But what I'm saying is what we learn on Sunday morning, the experiences we have here as a church should transform the way that we behave and we react the rest of the week, right? So we can't compartmentalize our lives or our interactions with people because that's not how God works. He's looking at your whole heart. He wants all of your allegiance, all of your attention. And so what you hear on Sunday morning must transform how we act on Monday. So getting kind of through the text here, at the beginning in Exodus 22, verse 18, there's 3 verses, 3 sentences right here. The first one, you shall not permit a sorceress to live. So you got to kill sorceresses. Verse 19, whoever lies with an animal shall be put to death. Okay, so we're talking about like some nasty stuff there. 20, whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. Now, at first glance, these aren't like super related. They seem like 3 completely different things, right? What they all 3 have in common is the offender is supposed to be put to death. It's pretty serious. And you almost always in the Old Testament see a capital punishment when it's related to some form of idolatry. That's almost always where it is. And if you look at these a little closer, all 3 of these are forms of idolatry. And so sorceress, you've got somebody practicing like dark arts and bad stuff and things. And what you're doing is you are replacing your trust and your leaning on God with something else. That's what idolatry is at its heart. Okay, what you should be leaning and trusting into God for, you are trusting and leaning into something else to provide. And so Saul, the king, the first king of Israel, trusts a medium to talk to him about like how a battle's going to go. Okay, that's a big time no-no. You're not supposed to do that. You should talk to God and trust God about how the battle's going to go, right? And so Saul gets in trouble, and he ends up being removed as the king, and then David's put in king, and that's a story for another day. But that's kind of what that's talking about. Okay, lying with an animal, that's not just talking about some creepy weirdo, okay? That has more to do with pagan temple worship kind of stuff. There's always, in that time, back then, there's always like creepy, weird stuff like that happening in worshiping gods and other gods. And so a lot of the sleeping around and the animal stuff, it's worship. Okay, that sounds like weird. Why would you worship that? But well, that's just kind of how it was. And so so this has to do again with replacing God with something else, with an idol. And so the first commandment: have no other gods besides me, and then no graven images, don't make an idol. So this is what this is talking about. Verse 20: whoever sacrifices to any god other than the Lord alone shall be devoted to destruction. So if you look at the second part, if we skip down a little bit, where honoring God comes up, is in verse 28. So we've got these 3 capital punishment crimes. We've got idol worship being taken very seriously. And in verse 28, it says, you shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. So again, kind of that sort of taking God's name in vain, not honoring God. But he also kind of throws in, not to curse a ruler of your people. Now, this is kind of pulled forward in the New Testament. The New Testament says to fear God and honor the king. Okay, now we don't always have kings, but of course they're talking about your ruler. And Paul gives us a whole dissertation on where authority comes from in Romans 13. And this is not a Romans 13 sermon. There is one of those in our archives somewhere. But the basic point that I want to make today is just that God is the source of all authority. And so when we honor a leader, when we honor a king, you're honoring God's authority that he's placed out. Okay, and it's not so much about the individual person as it is the office and the authority that person holds, right? So today, when we have a president that we don't like, which happens just about every other president or every president at this point, somebody's not happy, right? That's fine, that's okay. We still honor the authority that God has given that person. But you don't necessarily have to honor that person. You can kind of separate the two. And again, this is a story for another day. But just keep it in perspective, right? Fear God, honor the king. You still stand when he walks in the room. Verse 29, you shall not delay to offer from the fullness of your harvest and the outflow of your presses. The firstborn of your sons shall be given to me. You shall do the same with your oxen, with your sheep. 7 days shall be with its mother. On the 8th day, you shall give it to me. So I don't want to go into all the nuance of all these little things and giving your firstborn and stuff. I'm sure that's confusing. Don't worry about it right now. What we want to worry about here is what's the heart of what they're saying. Okay, what's the heart of what's going on? And so these kind of speak to sacrifices, tithing, giving to God. What's the source of your life? And so this practice of tithing, this is kind of God setting this up, and Abraham did it, and what you do is you honor God by giving him 10% of everything you have or take in. So in a modern sense, we don't have flocks and sheep and things, and used to give your best flocks and your best stuff. Now we just kind of give in the New Testament sense, we sort of just give the 10% of your income, right? And the idea of first fruits is that you would give the best of it. So rather than running your budget and saying, okay, let's see how everything pulls out. Oh, we got an extra $1.20. There's my tithe. Woohoo! Throw it in, right? That's not exactly how it's supposed to work. How it's supposed to work is that you would say, this is what God has given me as an income. So I'm going to take and say, thank you, Lord. Here's 10%. Give that away. Now I see where the rest of it fits in the budget. That's the heart of tithing, of giving, okay? And even more than a 10%, exactly, that's kind of a bare minimum. The New Testament for giving is this sort of radical, extravagant, God, you're the source of everything, so I'm going to be generous with what I have to people who need it and to the church. And so it's not this just sort of I give 10% because that's what the Bible says to do. No, it's I love God. I trust God so much. I know that he's the source of all things, and he's given me everything that I have, so I'm going to freely give because it's been freely given to me. And that's how we operate as New Testament believers in the kingdom of God. Okay, there's a much freer sort of aspect there. And so this kind of idea of like, give your firstborn sons, okay? Don't do that. Don't bring your firstborn son here and say, here, please don't do that. We'll be like, okay, you take him home. I'm not babysitting your kid for the afternoon, okay? Don't do that. That's not the point. The point is that we would recognize what is the source of all that we have. Who are we trusting to get us through, to help us to make ends meet? When you're looking at and you're at the end of the rope, and you're wondering what's going to happen, it's God who is our source. And so all of this with idolatry, all of this is just this kind of human battle, okay? We're very selfish beings by nature, and so what it is just keeping the priority of, God, you created me. God, you put me on this planet. God, you gave me all that I have, and I'm going to worship you because of that. And when I need something, when I'm lacking something, I'm going to come to you and ask for it. I'm not going to go to whatever else that can scratch the itch. The old theologian Augustine says, because we were made by you, our hearts are restless until they rest in you. Have you heard that quote thrown around before? Maybe it's probably written on something at Hobby Lobby, or it should be. But it's sorry, not my favorite store. But it's such a great way of saying, like, there is this sort of innate restlessness in the side of a human heart that says, I've been made by God, and we're made to fellowship and to commune with God and to be with him. And when we try to fulfill that in different places with different things, it's just, you're going to be restless until your heart rests in God. Jesus says it this way. He says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Have you heard that? So what he's saying is, what do you treasure? What do you value? And so for some people, the value is so much on money, on finances, on whatever, that they put their heart so into it that the only way to have enough money is to keep getting more money. And the only way to keep getting more money is to continue to be selfish with your money, right? This is kind of the way the world says to do it. And so you just continue to accumulate, and you're stepping on other people, and the capitalism monster steps in, and you're just like, I'm going, and it's just business, and you go, and now all of a sudden you're at the top. But you've stepped on how many people to get there. And your heart has been so tied up in what you treasure. Now, your treasure isn't always money. It can be many different things. But it's important to value, to put your heart in, to treasure what God says to treasure, what God says to value. So what do you treasure? What do you value? What do you trust the source of that treasure to be? The world isn't forever. It's important, but it's not forever. And instead of spending our whole lives accumulating, Jesus says, lay up treasure for yourself in heaven. He says, put your treasure things, value things that are eternal. Value things that mean something more. If you're burning relationships for financial gain, you're probably doing it wrong. Okay? Value what matters. If you treasure your stuff, you hold on to it tightly, that's where your heart will be. That's what he's saying. You'll become selfish, stingy, self-centered. But if your treasure is in heaven, and we trust God as our ultimate source, we give freely. We will be generous because we know that we only have because God has given in the first place. And you'll treat other people with more value than you treat yourself. And that's how you lay up treasures in heaven. Amen? All right, so second collection of laws here, treatment of foreigners and other people. That was kind of the God side of it. Where's your priority? Who's your source? Right? But in chapter 22, verse 21, it says, you shall not wrong a foreigner or oppress him, for you are foreigners in the land of Egypt. You shall not mistreat any widow or fatherless child. If you do mistreat them and they cry out to me, I will surely hear their cry. Now, I highlight this one again because this is kind of a staple verse in the whole section. Okay, when we read through it the first time, this kind of bookends this section a little bit. He says it at the front end, and it kind of goes through some more specifics, and then at the back end of it, again, they say it again. And so it kind of begs the question, like, why is God in the Bible always so concerned with widows and orphans? What's the big deal with widows and orphans? Okay? Now, you might be thinking of some things, but what's important is that God does not value based on position or economic status, but based on God's image, which is inside of every human being. Okay, so it's not your value based on your position or how much money you have or what class of people you're in or the influence that you carry, but you are valuable because God made you and his image is inside of you. And not just you, but every person on this planet. So, you know, what gets us in trouble is that we are so bent and so prone on making distinctions based on, again, selfishness. What's being taken away from me? What's being given to somebody else that I feel like I deserve? And maybe you do deserve it, but when our priorities are backwards, when we're treasuring and valuing our own survival more than somebody else's, we get things out of whack. And so what's interesting about these laws is Israel is like less than a year. You're talking like a couple of months tops outside of slavery, okay? So this is a people that has been in slavery for 500 years, like generation after generation after generation. I mean, like 500 years ago, what year is it? 1492? I mean, like Europeans just discovered America, like 500 years ago. And think about all the things that have happened since then, okay? So 500 years of slavery, and within a couple months, God is saying already, don't wrong foreigners. It's kind of like, okay, God, duh, we know what that's like, right? But he's already reminding them because he knows that, like, you know, there's something funny about human beings, and we have just such this bent towards, even though you just came out of it, how quickly we forget what it was like, right? How quickly you forget what an awful situation you just came out of, what it was truly like. And then all of a sudden, Israel, you're going to see it within a couple of books. Pretty darn soon, they're going to be treating other people not very well. They're not going to be remembering where they came from. And so Israel, who should have known better than anybody else how to treat foreigners, is being reminded that remember where you came from. You were slaves. You were foreigners in a strange land. You were non-citizens in Egypt. So when that happens in your country, when that happens to you, when people come and seek refuge in your nation, you better take care of them because this is the situation you were in, right? That's what he's saying to them. Don't forget where you came from. Now, the emphasis on widows and orphans, they're unable to take care of themselves. Obviously, we talked about some of the bride price in the last chapter and things like that. The way the culture was set up is that it's not a devaluing of women to pay a dowry or a bride price to a father to say, I want to marry your daughter. That's not a devaluing of women. That actually speaks to the value of a woman. That says, you can't just take my daughter and marry her and leave my family. Like, she's valuable to us. She's valuable to our family. She's not property, but she has a place, you know? And if you look even today, they try to put like a value, a price, a yearly wage sort of value on like a stay-at-home mom. Have you guys seen any of those statistics before? It's pretty cool. It's like way more than you would think. And they factor in things like the maintenance on the house or taking care of things or cooking meals instead of buying out and the cost of daycare and laundry and all the things that a stay-at-home mom does like thanklessly, you know? If you put a price tag on that, it's a pretty hefty price. So stay-at-home moms, man, rock and roll. Like you guys are, you know? And single parents, good Lord. Danielle was sick for like 2 days. Single dad life. It was, kids are alive. We'll just stop there. But the point is, like, widows, orphans, like, there's nobody to take care of them. And so the burden then is on their neighbors, is on their other people. And so just in the way that the society and the culture was, they were at a serious disadvantage. You know, it's not that different now. We have some government welfare programs and things like that, and that's great. That's phenomenal. But there's so much more that needs to be done and can be done and that people are doing. And so that's always important work, even today. And God values that because what happens is society is just bent towards you don't produce anything, you're not valuable, right? You just extract, you just cost money. We're just paying to keep you alive. And it's a dangerous, nasty, hard little stroke. But if good people don't keep that at bay, that's what happens. And then you go right down on the road, and you get the one thing that led to another, and you get Nazi Germany, and you get Holocausts, and you get extermination of disabled people and things like that. Because all of a sudden you don't value it anymore, right? And that's the slope that goes to. That's the dark side of going down that road. And so God's saying, remember these people, take care of them. It's hugely important. Verse 25, this is fun. If you lend money to any of my people with you who is poor, you should not be like a moneylender to him. You should not exact interest from him. So sure, yeah, like give him some money, but don't break the man's back with interest trying to pay it back, right? If you're borrowing money, it's probably because you don't have any money, right? So when you borrow some money and then you have to pay it back, that's not easy to do. So to make it worse by charging interest, and then you get the cycle of debtor's prison and slavery, and right, the slavery stuff we talked about last week had to do usually with owing a debt to somebody. So you can pay it back, or you can be kind of their bondservant and work it off for a number of years. And there's laws to protect that too. And so what it's saying is not don't let money people, but have some care, have some heart, right? The next verse, if you ever take your neighbor's cloak in a pledge as collateral, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. So you ever have like a teacher in high school? We had this one, he was a college algebra teacher, and if you needed to borrow a calculator, he'd take your driver's license. So he'd like, all right, what are you going to give me though? Or he'd take like, I don't know, maybe you didn't have a license, so he'd like, well, give me your shoe. Like you're not going to walk around school with one shoe, right? So you're going to go back, turn the calculator, right? You need some collateral, okay? So, again, a poor person is borrowing money from you, and he's like, I don't have anything for collateral. Well, give me your cloak. Do you know the cloak's like the inner undergarment piece? Like it's the last thing this guy has. He doesn't have anything to sleep in, they say. So he said, if you take it for collateral, give it back at the end of the day. So maybe just don't take it at all. But again, what are they saying? What are they saying? They're saying that don't extract from people who need help, right? Don't take advantage of people who don't have anywhere to help. Have compassion. Help them. Serve them. Love them. You may look down on them, but you need to help them. That's what's important from all of this. Chapter 23, it says, you shall not spread a false report in verse 1. You shall not join hands with a wicked man to be a malicious witness. We've all heard or watched crime dramas with bad witnesses, and you're sitting there on the couch, right? And you're watching, and you're like, he's lying. He's lying on the stand. They paid him off in the garage. I saw it. Go get the security footage, You got a bad witness, and now you got a major criminal getting off the hook, right? Or you got somebody else taking the fall. And it's like, man, if they would just, right? Okay, so don't do that. Verse 2, you shall not fall in, listen to this, with the many to do evil. Nor shall you bear witness in a lawsuit, siding with the many so as to pervert justice. Okay? Now, I'm going to skip that one and come back for a second. Where is it? Where it says again? So there's a couple moments here where he's saying, listen, we've all seen scenarios where there's a nice angry crowd, right? You guys ever heard this statement that the majority is almost always wrong? You ever heard that? And why do we always side with the majority? So what's dangerous in any culture is when the majority starts oppressing, right? And you start to get into these bad situations. This is what's happening. You've got many people doing evil and bearing witnesses in lawsuits, siding with the many so as to pervert justice. And the problem with a crowd is the peer pressure of a crowd, right? Crowds are powerful because they can do things to you. They can put pressure on you to do what they want you to do, whether it's right or wrong. And it's not easy to stand up to a crowd, but so often, very often, the crowd is wrong. And today we have crowds all around us all the time. We have little digital crowds. We have that favorite tweet from your favorite person that has 35,000 retweets and 75,000 likes. And you're like, I don't even know 75,000 people. Right? And you see those things go viral, and sometimes those posts are hateful or malicious, and they're just spreading like why? And you're like, what 35,000 people would retweet that? Like, why would they do that? And I'll tell you a secret, about 5,000 of them are like newscasters, about 10,000 of them are fake bots. 10,000 of them probably live in their mother's basement. Sorry if that's you. I'm sorry, that was rude. It's the problem with going with a crowd is it's easy. You feel like you're together. Maybe you're in a tribe with people who think like you, but what you have to do is you have to look at the other side of the coin, right? What is it that this crowd is railing against, and why? And make your own decisions. Can we be individual enough, right, as Americans, to make our own decisions instead of always following the crowd? Make that your goal coming up. See, it goes on, it says that if you meet your enemy's ox or his donkey going astray, you shall bring it back to him. If you see the donkey of one who hates you lying under its burden, you shall refrain from leaving him with it. You shall rescue it with him. Okay, this is an enemy. This is like somebody that you don't do business with anymore because they burned you or they did something bad. This is somebody you know that is a bad dude. This is somebody who hurt you. This is somebody who you're supposed to hate. This is an enemy. And he says, if you see his donkey going astray, bring it back. And again, what's the heart of it? You're not going to see your enemy's donkey laying around. You might see his car door open or his lights are on or something, whatever. That's a decent thing to do. Maybe you see his wallet laying down and you open it up and you're like, I know this guy. He's a bad guy. There's $1,000 in here, What are you going to do? What are you going to do? There's situations where you have a chance to be light to somebody, to shine a different way of living, to bring the kingdom of God into a little moment. Now we're running out of time, so I kind of want to get moving here. But coming back around at the end of this section in chapter 23, verse 9, it says again, "You shall not oppress a foreigner. You know the heart of a sojourner, for you were sojourners in the land of Egypt." So when the Bible repeats itself, it's for emphasis. And so this statement bookends the other laws, like we said, and it's what's so important is it's important to remember where you came from. What has God brought you from? What's your history on your walk with Christ? Only you know the road that you've walked. Only you know the choices that you've made. Only you know all of the rights and wrongs that you've done, the mistakes you've made, the things you did, whether they were before Christ or after Christ. The point is that you know what it's like to be in those situations. And so what happens is we will encounter people along our walks that are in the same place that we once were. And they're walking through things that you walked through. And if you're going to help them, you have to first have compassion on them, right? You have to first have some empathy. And I've said this before, empathy is a beautiful word that I think we've kind of left behind, unfortunately. And it's something that just to take a second and put yourself in somebody else's shoes. And again, if it's a situation that you came out of, man, you should have the most compassion for somebody like that, right? But so often we forget what it was really like. And we tell somebody to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. It's a phrase we throw around a lot. Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And we think I did it, you think I did that by myself. I got out of that situation. Maybe like 1 out of 1 million people actually accomplished coming out of something by themselves without help. But that's this sort of thing, this mantra as Americans that we hold so closely. I did it myself. I did it by myself. And I just want to just gently remind you, because I'm realizing this more and more in my life, that every single thing that you've accomplished has been because you're standing on somebody else's shoulders. And maybe you don't know them directly. Maybe there was no specific moment that you might be thinking, well, if somebody gave me $20,000, I could invest it in this and I could start this business and that. Well, that didn't happen. I raised my own money and I did this and I did that. Okay, but go back to the beginning. What family were you born into? Where'd you grow up? What kind of society are you in? What's the color of your skin? When did your family come to the United States? How long ago? What choices were made before you? What did your neighbor do that one time or not do? if you think real hard, you see there's so much more to where you are today than just doing things by yourself. And the point I want to make is this. So often we expect people to do by themselves what we never did by ourselves or could ever do by ourselves. And so just a little bit of empathy brings us right back to, how can I help? And so what we have so often is a cycle of violence or a cycle of poverty or a cycle of abuse. And if you want to break those cycles, if you want to break the cycle of violence, show love to someone you're supposed to hate. If you want to break the cycle of poverty, give someone an opportunity to succeed and help them achieve it. Think about the opportunities you've had in your life and where you can extend those opportunities to other people. And here's the bottom line with it, because if you look at where you're at today, like I'm walking with God, some of you are walking with God in here, some of you might be wondering what this is all about, but the Bible says that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us, okay? And there's in other places it says that while we were still enemies of God, he came, right? So this is God who loves you so much that while you were an enemy of God, he sent his only son to come and live a perfect life and be murdered and die. And then he rose into the dead so that you could be together. What an amazing gift that is, right? Would you do that for somebody that's an enemy of you? Boy, it would take me a minute. I'd have to think about it, right? But that's what we aspire to. That's the example that Christ left for us. When we were enemies of God, Christ died for us. And if we remember that, how could we not offer the same opportunity to those who are enemies to us? So we always like to say, what does Jesus have to do with all this? What does Jesus maybe have to say about this? Because it's as important as the Old Testament is, it's even more important to say, okay, what does Jesus have to say about it as well? And just make sure we're looking through that lens, right? So if you go to Matthew chapter 7, this is kind of towards the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew chapter 5 through 7, which is sort of Jesus laying out his kingdom. This is the way things work. There's a lot of really, 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 really good stuff in here, especially if you're reading the Old Testament. You're like, I don't know what to do with this. Come read this, see if Jesus has anything to say about it. But chapter 7, verse 12 of Matthew. This is Jesus talking. He says, so whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. There's a lot of laws. There's a lot of prophets. Okay, he's basically, the prophets is like, okay, the law is like the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The prophets is like everything else. Okay, so he's saying the summation of the Old Testament, what it's trying to say to you is whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. Treat others the way that you want to be treated, right? So simple, but so hard. What happens when they don't treat me like they want me to treat them? And that's not what it said. It says, treat others the way they would treat, that you wish they would treat you. See, this golden rule, so-called, is it's foundational to all of it. And you see the heart of it in these sections that we read, right? Don't be a false witness to a poor man. Don't take his cloak so he has nothing to sleep with. Don't let your enemy's donkey, because right, if your enemy's donkey is down on the road, if your donkey's laying down on the road and your worst enemy walks by it, wouldn't you hope maybe he would have just enough compassion to help that donkey get home? Right? If your car's broken down on the side of the road, you slid into an embankment, and that person who you just can't stand comes along to pull you out, wouldn't you hope that they would stop, right? And that's what it comes down to. A little bit of empathy. What would you want somebody, how would you want them to treat you? You've got to treat them that way first. Now it says elsewhere in the New Testament that as far as it depends on you, live peaceably with all people. And that's another verse that I love, because it's like, do what you can, right? Somebody may not let you treat them the way you want to be treated, But you still got to try. Now, this is interesting. This is something that I think is overlooked many times, but verse 12 is whatever you wish to do to others would do to you, do also to them. This is the law and the prophets. Verse 13, with no break, with no nothing, says, enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. But the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. And if you take these verses back to back, he might actually be saying that the narrow road, which many of us may be thinking about as salvation right now, the narrow road that few find is treating other people the way that you would want to be treated. And if you think about it, I don't know that many people, besides you guys, that treat other people the way they want to be treated. It's very uncommon, isn't it? It really is. And if you know somebody who does live their life that way, they're usually spoken very well of, aren't they? That's a very selfless person. It's a very generous person. They're so kind. So easy to get along with, right? So if the way is narrow that leads to life, and few find it, well, I hope you're looking for it. Because the easy way that's wide that leads to destruction, many enter that one. Remember what we said about crowds? They can be dangerous. So here's the last thing I want to say. If we remember where we came from, we will have more grace for those that come after us. If we remember where we came from, we will have more grace for those that come after us because we know what it's like, right? Israel did get in trouble many times for not treating foreigners well, but one of the things that is a staple of their culture is the proper treatment of foreigners who come in. Very hospitable people, even today. So, knowing what you know, now we have to live it. We can't just be hearers of the word, but doers also, as James says. And it starts small, guys. I'm not asking for a massive change. And of course, as always, I'm preaching to myself, but it starts small. So start with a little bit of empathy. Start with putting yourself in someone else's shoes, right? Just start there. Before you write that comment, before you send that reply, before you even think that thought, right? Just put yourself in the other person's shoes just for a minute and think about how that would feel if you were them. Think about what you might want somebody to do for you if you were them. If you don't have any empathy, you can't treat someone else how you would want to be treated. So as people in the kingdom of God, let's be more compassionate and less belligerent, more graceful and less combative. Quicker to listen, slower to anger. We all know some angry Christians. Christians can be some of the most angry people you'd ever see as you're scrolling through that Facebook feed, right? Y'all know, come on. And sometimes it's us, sometimes it's whatever. So let's be less belligerent. Let's be a little quieter. Let's be a people of empathy. Quicker to listen, slower to anger. Take a pause, say a prayer, think twice before you join in the gossip. Offer empathy when someone pushes towards judgment. And remember, the crowd is almost always wrong, right? Hey, stand up with us, if you would. Let's pray. God, thank you for this morning. Thank you for who you are. Thank you for your compassion, your generosity. God, you have every reason to be angry with us almost all the time. But your word says, we know it to be true, that you are slow to anger, that you are rich in mercy, and that compassion is one of your greatest qualities. And so, Lord, just as we were enemies of you and you sent your son to die for us, I pray, God, that we would have such a compassion for those around us, for those who may be different, for those who may be from the outside, or that we would be a people who welcomes each other. God, give us such a great spirit of empathy that when others are quick to pass a judgment and quick to write somebody off and quick to exclude somebody, Lord, that we would be ones who would step in and be quicker to offer a helping hand, to be quicker to listen to somebody's story before we write them off. And Lord, I know that when we ask for compassion and patience and empathy and things like that, you don't often just give us those qualities, but you give us opportunities for those to respond in that way. And so, Lord, I'm just going to pray for that this morning. I pray that anybody who is seeking more empathy, to have a softer heart as you have for us, Lord, I pray that you would give them opportunities. Lord, frustrate us with failure as we grow to be more like Christ. And Holy Spirit, go before us and give us opportunities to be the kingdom where we go. That we be a people who loves and who is empathetic and who offers an ear and a hand to help. Lord, I know this people is gracious and generous and capable of that. And I pray that you would bless those who are doing it and seeking it and help the rest of us who need that help. God, we love you so much. We thank you for loving us. In Jesus' name we pray.